What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my week 1 top 40 wide receiver rankings. I've already gone through my running back rankings. If you guys have missed them, you can check it out after this. But for this specific video, we're looking at the wide receivers, splitting these guys up into different tiers. I think week 1 is always the toughest week to do these rankings because we will never know less than we do right now. We don't know exactly what the wide receiver splits are going to be. How much are these rookies going to play? What are the defenses looking like? Are certain corners going to shadow the wide receiver 1? Are they going to shadow the wide receiver 2? There's just a lot up in the air, but I did my best for these top 40. Before I hop into it, if you guys have any questions, you can drop them down below. I'll make sure to get back to every single person who comments. But let's dive right into the rankings. Starting off in tier 1, I have a top 5, and these were also the top 5 wide receivers that I was taking, in redraft for season long. So we have Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, and Justin Jefferson. I'm going to point out some injuries throughout this video, starting off here with Tyreek Hill. He's been dealing with a thumb injury. He's missed some practice, but he's back. Should be good to go. Don't really have any concerns there. For CeeDee Lamb, he does draw a pretty tough matchup. The Browns allowed the 3rd fewest points per game to wide receivers last season. They're bringing in a good secondary again here in 2024. But you draft CeeDee Lamb, he's obviously going to be locked in your lineup. You play your studs regardless of matchup. And then for Jamar Chase, obviously the big red flag here is his contract situation. He might not get that settled by week 1. And obviously if he's not playing, he's not going to be starting for you. But if he gets a contract, even if it's like last minute, say he signs his contract 20 minutes before the game, I do not care. He is going to be playing in my lineup. So if he's active, I'm starting him. Obviously, if he's not, you pivot, you find someone else. And then Jefferson wrapping up this tier. Then tier 2 is just also going to be my wide receiver 6 through 8. I had a pretty clear tier with those guys. So AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson, Puka Nacua, you drafted them late round 1, early round 2. Obviously, they are going to be locked into your lineup. Puka Nacua did have a knee injury, during preseason training camp. He has logged full practices. He should be 100% heading into week 1. Now, looking at tier 3, these are like our back-end wide receiver 1s through like the mid-tier wide receiver 2s. Start off with Drake London, Nico Collins, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, just all guys that I think are really solid plays this week. Then I have Jalen Waddle, and he has missed some time dealing with an undisclosed injury. I believe people have been speculating that it is a left calf injury, and Jalen Waddle was kind of banged up throughout last year, so it's not great that he's heading into the season kind of nicked up, but he's back at practice. I'm not overly concerned. Not a terrible matchup here against the Jaguars, so I think he's a solid play as a high-end wide receiver 2. Then Mike Evans is someone who I'm much higher on this week than I am in terms of just like him as a redraft guy season long. I think I had him as my wide receiver 20 or 21 heading into the season. But this week I have him as my wide receiver 14. I like the matchup here against the Commanders. They allowed the 2nd most points per game last year to wide receivers, so I think he can definitely take advantage of it. And then the last 3 guys in this tier, Chris Olave, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Rashee Rice. Want to talk specifically about Marvin Harrison Jr. and Rashee Rice. I'm confident that Marvin Harrison Jr. can produce right out of the gate. I think he'll give solid production. Maybe in future weeks he'll start to build. So like I had him, I think, as my wide receiver 9 heading into the year. I'll give him a little bit of grace the first few weeks, but I'm still expecting him to be very startable. And then for Rashee Rice, I feel like this might be the best week to play him. I think, once you get Xavier Worthy going, Hollywood Brown is back. Maybe he's more of like a wide receiver 3, back end wide receiver 2. But in week 1 here with Hollywood Brown out, you have Xavier Worthy, who, I think he's going to have a solid role. I'll talk about him later on. But they could also, coddle him a little bit, maybe not completely unleash him in week 1. So I think Rashee Rice should be the focal point at the wide receiver position here. Not a great matchup here against the Ravens, actually a pretty bad matchup. But I do think if he's the clear number 1 at wide receiver, he's obviously going to be producing within this Chiefs offense. Then tier 4 here, decently large tier, mid to back end wide receiver 2s into our high end wide receiver 3s. Start off here with Malik Nabers. This is about where I have him ranked in season long. It's a decent matchup here against the Vikings. I know the concerns with the Giants offense. I know the concerns with Daniel Jones. I have confidence in Malik Nabers. I have confidence in Dable. If you drafted Malik Nabers in round 3 or round 4, I would definitely not shy away from starting him here in week 1. Then we have Deebo Samuel. I have him ranked higher in terms of season long. Just a tough matchup here against the Jets. Very tough secondary. They actually allowed the fewest points per game to wide receivers last year. So I think he takes a hit. We'll see who Sauce Gardner's kind of shadowing. If it's Debo, if it's Ayuk. If he is going to shadow the wide receiver one, I'm guessing that would be Ayuk. So I do slightly prefer Debo here, but still a tough matchup, regardless of if Sauce is on him or not. Then we have DJ Moore. I think he's a nice wide receiver to play. Titans do have a decent secondary, but I do think, Bears 6th to 8th in terms of implied points. I think they're going to score. DJ Moore's their wide receiver one. Then we have T. Higgins here. I'd feel confident playing Higgins regardless of the Chase situation, whether Chase is in or out. But if Jamar Chase is out, he would definitely take a bump, probably at the very least into tier 3. So I assume in like your typical 12-team league, he's going to be a locked-in starter for you. But I think he becomes like a locked-in priority start if Jamar Chase does miss this game. Then we have Devonta Smith, just solid back-end wide receiver 2 here. Then we have Amari Cooper. Not the best matchup against the Cowboys, but I think Cooper will be fine. Then we have Stephon Diggs. I think early in the season, I like Tank Dell long-term, but early on, if Stephon Diggs is getting the clear-cut wide receiver 2 routes, I think he's in like that fringe wide receiver 2 territory. Then we have DK Metcalf. The risk here with Metcalf is if Pat Surtain shadows him, that would obviously be a pretty tough matchup, but I still think if you drafted him round 3, round 4, he's playable in that like fringe wide receiver 2 area. And then the final guy in this tier is going to be Brandon Ayuk. Like I talked about with Debo, he draws a tough matchup, could have Sauce Gardner-Johnson on him. And then also you just have the risk, or I don't know if it's risk, but there's the uncertainty of if he's going to play like the full set of snaps right away. Hasn't been participating in training camp, just got that contract thing done. Not saying like they're going to punish him or anything, but are they going to throw him out there for 100% raw participation? I wouldn't be shocked if he's eased into this game a little bit. So I think in future weeks, I'll definitely have him ranked higher. But you have that, and then the combination of the tough matchup. That's why I have him here as like a wide receiver 3 play. Now shifting into tier 5, starting off with Chris Godwin. Like I talked about with Mike Evans, I think this is a nice matchup here against the Commanders. So I like Chris Godwin more this week than I do for season long, even though I'm very in on him for both. Then we have Michael Pittman Jr. Honestly, Pittman's just someone I'm lower on than consensus, so this may seem low to some. Like I know on certain platforms, ESPN, I think he's like an early round 3 pick. To me, that's wild, so I'm not ranking him low because I like hate the matchup or anything. I'm just a little bit lower than consensus, so this is fairly in line with where I have him ranked, throughout the rest of the season. Then we have Terry McLaurin. Buccaneers secondary is interesting. I think it's probably worse than it is last year, so I think Terry gets a bump a few spots up. We have Zay Flowers. Not a great matchup here against the Chiefs. I think on both sides it's kind of a tough one, but mid-tier wide receiver 3, a fair spot. Then we go with Tank Dell. Like I talked about with Diggs, I do like Tank Dell long-term, but I think week 1 he's not going to be in those 2 wide receiver sets. So even though I think he's still a solid play as like a wide receiver 3 option, I do think he's someone who's probably going to build on his production throughout the season. And then the final 2 guys here, George Pickens going up against the Falcons, and then Deontay Johnson here going up against the Saints. Now shifting into tier 6, starting off with Calvin Ridley, it seems like the D-Hop situation is a little bit up in the air. We're not quite sure if he's going to play. I'll say if DeAndre Hopkins plays, this is pretty much where I'd have Ridley. But if D-Hop is out, then I think you could definitely bump Ridley up, probably into tier 5 as an even more solid option. Then we get to Xavier Worthy, who I kind of referenced earlier. I have him as my wide receiver 35. And in terms of like redraft rest of season, I am very, very high on Xavier Worthy. I have him as a top 30 wide receiver. I think he's going to be amazing this season. And I think he's going to be solid in week 1. Like if you're playing Xavier Worthy, I'm not too scared about it. I know I'm going to have him starting in at least a few of my leagues, but I do think there's like some risk where they're really kind of easing him into the offense. I don't think it's going to be the same extent that we saw with Rashee Rice, where like he wasn't getting real snaps until like 5-6 games left in the season. But I think maybe week 1, they slow play him a little bit, give him a limited amount of routes. And it's kind of just one of those situations where if I'm confident he's going to ball out throughout the rest of the season, I'm not necessarily trying to like jump the gun and force him into my lineup week 1. So if he's in there, I think it's totally fine. But like I wouldn't force it over someone else, because say you play, a Calvin Ridley, a Deontay Johnson over Worthy, and Worthy goes off week 1 and dominates, it might be a little bit disappointing, but at least then like, all right, this dude's just going to absolutely kill it rest of season. If he goes out there, kind of lays an egg, you might be a little bit disappointed. So that's where I'm at with Worthy. I think Hollywood Brown being out definitely helps. Like I said, I'm cool with him playing, but I think we do just have to kind of acknowledge the risk of maybe they're easing him into the offense a little bit. After Worthy, I have Keenan Allen. I think he's fine as like a back-end wide receiver 3. This may seem low to some. I'm kind of just lower on Keenan Allen than consensus, so makes sense why it might seem a little low here. Then we have Brian Thomas Jr. I'm very high on Brian Thomas Jr. I think maybe I'm tempering expectations a little bit here in week one, but I'm pretty confident he's going to be like a full-time starter in there on 2 wide receiver sets. So I think he's definitely a rookie who could produce, right away here for the Jaguars. Back-to-back Packers wide receivers, Jaden Reed, Christian Watson. If you remember last year, this was like a must-target Eagles secondary when we were looking at fantasy wide receivers. They allowed the most points per game to the wide receiver position. I don't think that's going to carry over here into 2024. I'm not saying they're going to be like one of the best secondaries in the NFL, but they definitely made some additions. They worked to improve it. So I don't think this is like a must-target matchup. I'm very interested in seeing what the route split is between these Packers wide receivers. Like my guess heading into the season is that Watson and Dobbs are going to be in on 2 wide receiver sets. I prefer Watson over Dobbs, and then I think Jaden Reed is going to be coming out of the slot. The question is just though, like, how many routes is Jaden Reed getting? What's his route participation? And is he going to be able to score enough touchdowns, get enough like creative usage in the run game to kind of overcome the lack of snaps? So that's my concern. I kind of want to see it first before I'm all in on, both or one of these guys. So that's why I have him at wide receiver 38 and 39. And then the final guy here, Christian Kirk, he's been dealing with a calf injury, should be good to go. Full transparency, I'm pretty low on Christian Kirk overall, but I think, he's a proven option, a fine play in week one. And then just a couple of honorable mentions here with Keon Coleman, Cortland Sutton. I think both those guys are playable also. I think in the future, we'll get guys like Lad McConkey, Roma Dunze, who I'll feel a little bit more confident in, but week one, just not quite sure what those guys' roles are going to be. So that's going to wrap it up for my top 40, plus I guess like Coleman and Cortland Sutton is like my top 42. If you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Any questions, drop them down below. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.